Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I hope you're all doing well. It is Saturday afternoon, it's 4 p.m. here in a very overcast and somewhat cold north of England. So I'm going to keep this one quite brief because doing that, it's easier to watch on the replay, but also because I feel that I've sat in this chair like non-stop over the last couple of weeks while streaming the Megan Boswell trial. So I am going to keep this one quite brief. So for those of you who haven't seen the video that I put out this morning, that was one of the motions I read through and commented on, one of the motions that came out yesterday from Richard Allen's defence team. It's still all in relation to the motion to correct errors that they... When did they post that? I don't know. I'm losing track of time. 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago. Well, the state responded. All right. The state responded to the defence's motion to correct errors. I did a video on that. And then yesterday, the defense filed 2 motions. One of them I read this morning. And then we've got this one that I'm going to read now. All right, it's very, very, very enlightening. I mean, look, this morning's is literally mind-blowing. That's not hyperbole. Right? The video title from this morning, when I said mind-blowing, I was literally mind-blown. It's not hyperbole whatsoever. The defense is striking back in the only way it can, with logic and fact. Whereas the state respond with what they're good at doing, which is deflection and complete lies, in my humble opinion. All right, so I'm not going to say individual hellos because I do want to get straight into this and keep it quite brief. It is crazy. Yeah. No wonder they banned all those names. Exactly. Right side of the Pennines. I'm on the right side of the Pennines. I don't know about you, but I'm definitely on the right side of the Pennines. But yeah, it did make me wonder why the state, in their motion in limine, as well as banning Odinism and all the names, Westfall, Fields, Holder, why they also banned Ron Logan, Kegan Kline, and Tony Kline. I thought, oh, well, maybe it's because, there's a lot being said about Logan, there's a lot being said about the Klines. They were investigative areas, and the state ran down all of those leads, and they didn't amount to anything, and it's just muddying the waters. That's what I assumed, but no. The state had knowledge of stuff that the defense had absolutely no idea about. So, look, if the stuff that's coming out from Reese Davis, and if you don't know what on earth I'm talking about, go and watch the video from this morning. If all of that is true, and there's no reason to believe that it isn't, that is newly discovered evidence. That is absolutely 100% newly discovered evidence. And that's exactly what they need to get this appeal kick-started. Because I can imagine they're not going to get very far with Judge Gull. So Judge Gull does have a little bit more time left to respond. So she can respond with, all right, we're going to vacate this trial. We're going to say this trial wasn't sound. This trial needs to be redone. She could actually say that. Or at least she could give them a hearing so that both sides could present all their evidence. Or she can just deny it without hearing. And that's what she's very good at. If she completely ignores it and does nothing, that counts as a denial. And then it's off to the appeals court. This is kind of the first stage. They have to go through this to get to the appeals court. All right, so this is The second thing they released yesterday. All right, defendants verified motion to strike the state's response to the motion to correct errors. So what the state put out this, I'm not going to read through it because I have got a video reading through all this, the state's response to the motion to correct errors, which was just nonsense, absolute nonsense. So we will refer to it, though, maybe a couple of times. We will maybe just keep it in the background there as reference. All right, let's go. The defendant, Richard Allen, by counsel, now comes before the court with his verified motion to strike the state's response to motion to correct errors, filed on February 4th, 2025. For the reasons that follow, the court should strike the state's response in its entirety from the record of this case. The state's response is unverified and, without supporting affidavits, asserts numerous facts outside the record in violation to Trial Rule 59H2, which provides, quote, if a party opposes a motion to correct error made under this subdivision, that party has 15 days after service of the moving party's affidavits and motion in which to file opposing affidavits. See also Marietta versus Romero. Okay, 2023. A motion to correct error under Trial Rule 59H1, unsupported by affidavits, presents nothing for a court to consider, because all the state posted was this 10 pages of stuff, just stuff, like Nick McClelland's opinion on stuff. Nothing to support it whatsoever. Just his opinion on stuff. All right, maybe a little bit more than that, but that's how it read. In particular, on page 2 of the state's response, Mr. McClelland alleges, on November 3rd, 2022, the state received an email from attorney Brett Gibson stating that he would not be representing the defendant, herein attached as State's Exhibit 3. That allegation is based on facts outside the record and unsupported by affidavit or verification in violation of Trial Rule 59H2. So, if you remember, the defence's motion to correct error, one of the things that they brought up was the fact that they had a safekeeping hearing, if you can call it that, way back in November 2022, when Rick Allen was newly arrested, right? They had him in Carroll County Jail for a day or two. Then they transferred him to White County Jail, supposedly because there wasn't enough room in Carroll County. And then they had a hearing in which his attorney wasn't invited. His attorney wasn't aware of it. And yes, he did have an attorney. He had an attorney. Kathy Allen paid $5,000 for Rick Allen, a private attorney called Brett Gibson. All right. And Nick McClelland and the sheriff at the time, Tobe Leesenby, knew that Rick Allen had an attorney. Knew it because Brett Gibson had communicated with them. And Nick McClelland had communicated back. So they knew he had an attorney. Their argument is, oh, well, he was only there for a few days and he didn't put in an appearance and this, that, and the third. All right, cool. All right. Yeah, he didn't stay very long. He didn't stay very long because he realized Rick Allen wasn't going to get out. And clearly, Kathy Allen didn't have a huge amount of money to pay for a private attorney. That's why Rick Allen threw himself at the mercy of the court and asked for court-appointed attorneys. That's how Brad Rosie and Andrew Baldwin got the case. Even so, right, they were aware that he had an attorney, even if it was just for a few days. Okay. But they did this supposedly, the safekeeping hearing behind everybody's backs. So that was one of the points that they brought up in the motion to correct error. And the state responded with a whole lot of kerfuffle about it. All right. Okay. On page 7 to 8 of the state's response, Mr. McClelland alleges the defence received the van video and any information pertaining to Ron Logan included in Mr. Allen's motion to correct error on January 30th, 2024. That allegation, Mr. McClelland asserts, is supported by State's Exhibit 7, a discovery release. These allegations are based on facts outside of the record and unsupported by affidavit or verification in violation with Trial Rule 59H2. So the other two things that were included in the motion to correct error was the van video, right, and Ron Logan. That was the first time we heard. Nobody had heard before about Reese Davis, who was an inmate at Newcastle Correctional Facility when Ron Logan was, and that Ron Logan had confessed to him. So the state again, page 7 to 8. Let's have a look what they're. I'm not going to read all this, but just refreshing my memory here. So they say here, finally, the testimony by Brad Weber was not the exclusive evidence the state used to convict Rick Allen. Well, it weighed very heavily with the jury, didn't it? Yes. Because it was convincing. It was convincing. However, what the state didn't tell the jury at the trial was that the van, Brad Weber's van, which the state's timeline needed it to pass under the Mourne High Bridge at 2:27, 2:30. But actually, there's a video that shows the van on the private drive, so maybe a couple of minutes away from his home, at 2:44. So, according to the state's timeline, Libby's phone was all the way over the other side of the creek at its final destination by 2:32. But the jury didn't hear about that, did they? Brad Weber was put on the stand and he lied. He must have known. He must have known. He lied. He either lied at the trial or he lied in 2017, because in 2017, Brad Weber said he arrived home at 3:30. On the stand, under oath, at the trial, he said he arrived home about 2:30. Well, neither of those is correct. So he either lied both times or he's mistaken both times. And then the Reese Davis claim about Ron Logan, well, they say any information pertaining to Ron Logan falls under the state's motion in limine concerning third-party motive. The defence had 3 days to present evidence to meet their burden for third-party motive. They mentioned Ron Logan but failed to meet their burden with the court. They chose not to present this evidence at the hearing. They also did not present this evidence when they renewed their motion during the trial. This now seems to be an effort by the defence to use the motion to correct error as an effort to circumvent their burden concerning third-party motive. But they didn't have the full story, did they? They didn't have the full story back then. There's things coming out now that they didn't know. Anyhow, back to this. Okay. On page 8 of the state's response, Mr. McClelland says Reese Davis was interviewed by law enforcement, which he was, as shown by the defence exhibits 4A, 4B and 4C. But Mr. McClelland also says Mr. Davis requested a polygraph, which he failed miserably. So basically, the state said what Reese Davis said about Ron Logan's confession mustn't have been true because he failed a polygraph. But we all know, boys and girls, don't we, that polygraphs are not admissible evidence in court. So it doesn't matter. It's a moot point whether Reese Davis passed or failed a polygraph. It's a moot point. All right, but let's go with it. These allegations by Mr. McClelland are based on facts outside the record and unsupported by affidavit or verification in violation with Trial Rule 59H2. Similarly, on page 8 of the state's response, Mr. McClelland says that Ron Logan told Mr. Davis he removed the cell phone battery from the girl's phone and left the phone behind and took the girls' clothing from the scene and burnt them. Nothing in any of Mr. Allen's exhibits pertaining to Ron Logan's confession to Mr. Davis say anything about Logan removing a battery. Yes. Thank you. Because when I read this, and I read this, what paragraph is it? But about taking the battery out. All right, taking the battery out. There we go. So this is Nick Whelan's words. Mr. Davis gave a statement that alleged Ron Logan confessed to him that he killed the older girl first, or Libby, and then took the youngest one away, Abby, and that he killed the second victim later and then brought her back to the scene. That he went back to the scene after search party searched his property and moved the girls to another location. Well, no. What we know from Reese Davis, at least what was written in the motion to correct error, was that he tried to move Libby, and indeed Libby had been moved. Libby's body had been moved from where she likely died to where she was found. He tried to move her, but she was too heavy. And then Abby, he took away with him. Now, there's no question of Abby being dead when he took her away. So it's likely, if this is true and Ron Logan did this, it's likely Abby left the scene alive and came back later. Still probably alive, I would imagine. Or not, maybe not. Because it would be possible, Abby's only tiny. It would be possible to carry Abby back. Especially if there's more than one person involved. Go and watch this morning's video, because we now know, according to Reese Davis, there is likely 3 people involved. Working together. So absolutely, if there's 3 people, Abby's easy to move, to be killed elsewhere and then move back and just put next to Libby. All right, look. So that's not true based on what we know at the moment. And this confused the hell out of me when I read this. Like, he moved the cell phone battery from the girl's phone. Look, you can remove an iPhone battery, but it's not easy. It's not like, do you remember the old phones that we used to have when phones were new and you could just basically take the back off? You know, you could just click the back off and take the battery out. Well, yeah, you can remove an iPhone battery, but it's a pain in the ass to do it. So would he really bother to take the battery out? Because it would be obvious that the battery had been taken out. If it had been found with the battery taken out, it's obvious, isn't it? And left the phone behind, and that he took the girl's clothing from the scene and burnt it. Well, we know that's not true either. So it did look like there were some things in this confession that weren't true. Now, I wondered whether Reese Davis remembered it wrong, or there was some stuff that Ron Logan said that just was flat out lies. But apparently now we hear from the defense that was all nonsense. So where did Nick McClelland get this from? Is there more that Reese Davis said that the state's aware of, but the defence isn't? If so, goes back to what I said this morning. Where is that other information that the state has from Reese Davis that the defence is wanting? Is this a tell from Nick McClelland? Has he put his foot in his mouth by providing this information that the defence does not have? And if so, why does the defence not have it? Because the state's hiding stuff. The state's hiding stuff. All right. Nothing in any of Mr. Allen's exhibits pertaining to Ron Logan's confession to Mr. Davis says anything about Logan removing a battery from any phone. Similarly, nothing in Mr. Allen's exhibits pertaining to Ron Logan's confession to Reese Davis says anything about Logan in the girl's clothes. He said he burnt his own clothes, but he never said anything about burning the girl's clothes. These allegations by Mr. McClelland are based on facts outside the record and unsupported by affidavit or verification in violation to Trial Rule 59H2. Not that Nick cares. He doesn't care about the rules. Why? Because he has the judge on his side. The judge just waves things through when it's Nick McClelland. Doesn't matter how much he lies, how much he ignores the rules. All right, so we got a footnote here. The tip in the Orion database, Defendant's Exhibit 4A, does recite Logan told Reese how he burnt his clothes in the fire pit and where it was located. See also the Defendant's Exhibit 4B at page 3, burnt his clothes in a burn pile. Thank you, Carol. That's very kind of you for the £5. Thank you so much. Rick Allen was scapegoated. He's a patsy. They needed someone. They needed someone to pin this on. Why did they need someone to pin this on? Because it had gone on so long. It had gone on so long. And oh, look what was coming up in November of 2017. It was the sheriff's election. Tony Liggett wanted to be elected sheriff. All his pals in law enforcement wanted him to be sheriff, but he was on somewhat of shaky ground because he was an absolute clown. So what better to get people to vote for him is an arrest in the Delphi case. Come on, makes sense. But again, nothing anywhere says anything about Logan confessing to taking a battery out of a phone. While the court might take Mr. McClelland's misstatement of fact about the burning of the clothes as simply a mix-up on his part, either Mr. McClelland is making up allegations about Logan removing a battery from a phone out of whole cloth, has access to information about Ron Logan's confession to Reese Davis he has not shared with the defence. Boom. So is this a flat out lie, or is this stuff that the state knows but has not turned over to the defence? If that's the case, the defence is absolutely right that the state is hiding stuff that they absolutely should have the knowledge of. Brady, thank you. Deb's in space. Brady versus Maryland. Ooh, yes. In either event, there is a reason Trial Rule 59H2 requires affidavits in support of a response to a motion to correct error when that response is based on evidence outside of the record. Also on page 8 of the state's response, Mr. McClelland says, no evidence places Ron Logan at the scene of the murders. This allegation by Mr. McClelland is based on facts outside the record and unsupported by affidavit or verification in violation of Trial Rule 59H2. Yeah, because how does he know? How does McClelland know that Ron Logan wasn't at that scene? How does he know that? How does he know that? Because there is evidence that places Ron Logan at the scene. His phone. If we go back to the Ron Logan search warrant that was done by Nicole Robertson from the FBI, that is dated the 17th of March 2017, so just a month after the murders. The search warrant to search the entirety of Ron Logan's property talked about Ron Logan's phone. And Ron Logan's phone at 7:56 p.m. on the 13th of February, and again at something past 10, I want to say something like 12 minutes past 10, was at the crime scene, was in the vicinity of the crime scene. His phone twice that evening was in the vicinity of that crime scene. Ron Logan was on that bridge, or at least in the vicinity of it, at 2:09. He lied about an alibi, and he also lied about where he was that evening. He did go to the fish store in Lafayette, but not at the time he said. And when he said he was inside, like all night, dealing with his fish, no, he wasn't. No, he wasn't. His phone was outside in the vicinity of the crime scene twice that evening. So how does Mr. McClellan know that no evidence places Ron Logan at the scene? Is he saying that the FBI got it all wrong? He lives 800 meters from the crime scene, didn't he? I don't know the exact distance, but it's not very far. The girls were found on Ron Logan's land, like down at the bottom of the hill near the creek. So you go up the hill, across a little field, and there's Ron Logan's house. But his phone was in the vicinity of the bridge where the girls were. We know the girls were on the bridge at 2:09. We know they were. Unless the state want to tell us that the BG video was all nonsense, because the BG video was taken 2:13 into 2:14 towards the south side of the bridge. So unless the state wants to come along and say it lied about that as well, which wouldn't surprise me, the girls had to be on that bridge at 2:09 to be over the other side of the bridge at 2:13. Ron Logan's phone puts him in the vicinity of the bridge at 2:09, not on his way to Lafayette to buy an aquarium or whatever he was buying. Unless the state want to say that the FBI got it wrong and the FBI lied. And then at night, at 7:56 p.m., and then something past 10, his phone is in the vicinity of the crime scene. Does the state have any evidence that Rick Allen was at that crime scene? Does the state have evidence of Rick Allen's phone at that crime scene, either in the afternoon or on the bridge or at the crime scene in the evening? No, they don't. They don't. And yet, Ron Logan went to his grave without any arrest or anything pertaining to this crime. There's more evidence against Ron Logan than there is against Rick Allen. Let's put it that way. Let's be clear on this. Did they ever go to the dump and retrieve Ron Logan's garbage from the next day? Good question. I don't know the answer to that. But he was throwing, it was before the crime. It was before the girls even got to the bridge that Ron Logan was at the dump. Like there's the video. The video's out there. I've played the video in a previous live stream, and it's dated 11 something in the morning. So whatever he threw away, it's before the girls even got to the bridge, so it's not relevant. Now, if he went back to the dump, then obviously. But whatever he threw away that morning is not relevant to the crime. All right, so on page 9 of the state's response, Mr. McClellan says, Sergeant Cecil was able to observe photos of the phone when it was found. So this is Libby's phone, right? Not Ron Logan's phone, Libby's phone. So Sergeant Cecil is the state's person who extracted the data from Libby's phone. The second person, the first person who did it in 2017, didn't do a very good job of it. And then Sergeant Cecil came along and got more information from it. All right, so was able to observe photos of the phone when it was found. Herein attached are State's Exhibits 9, 10, and 11. Footnote 2. The court might want to consider whether to hold Mr. McClelland in direct criminal contempt. But of course you won't. Of course you won't. That's only, that kind of thing is only reserved for the defence. For publicly filing crime scene photographs of the court-ordered seal. Yes. Yes. Yeah. Nick McClelland posted photos of Libby's phone at the crime scene, completely in violation to the seal that's on the crime scene photos at Nick McClelland's own request. Might want to do that. Might want to do that. All right. All right. Whereas here, the court has first-hand and immediate knowledge of acts demonstrating a clear disregard for its authority, which threatens to undermine the integrity of the judicial process. Summary proceedings for direct criminal contempt are available. The power of Indiana courts to summarily punish for direct criminal contempt, while specified by statute, rests upon the common law. It's inherent to the courts. In the court, sorry. Alternatively, under Indiana Code 344731 and 344735, the court might consider issuing a rule to support cause why Mr. McClelland should not be held in indirect criminal contempt for his willful violation of the order of this court. I know Nick McClelland's going to come along and say, yeah, but that was just a photo of Libby's phone at the crime scene. That wasn't the actual bodies. Still the crime scene though, isn't it? It's still showing a picture of the phone where it was found at the crime scene. So, you know, might want to think about that. In addition to not saying whether Sergeant Cecil actually observed these photos, this allegation by Mr. McClelland is based on facts outside the record and unsupported by affidavit or verification in violation to Trial Rule 59H2. Also on page 9 of the state's response, Mr. McClelland alleges that Sergeant Cecil's testimony that the log entry on Libby's phone reflecting the headphone behaviour could have been caused by a malfunction due to dirt or water in the headphone jack was based on his knowledge and experience as a forensic phone examiner. Sergeant Cecil's trial testimony about the possible effect of dirt or water in the headphone jack was based entirely on a Google search performed during a break at Mr. Allen's trial. Absolutely. We all saw that happening. Obviously, we didn't literally see it happening because we weren't allowed in the courtroom, were we? But the people who did manage to get a seat in the courtroom saw this unfolding in real time. That Sergeant Cecil not be called a phone expert for knowing that a headphone jack can play up if it's got dirt in it or water in it. No, he Googled it. He Googled it. That's not, I'm sorry, that is not expert testimony. Anybody can come along and do a Google search and find all sorts of stuff. No. Thank you. It's me, Dee, for the $9.99. When journalists suck, we're lucky to have folks like you covering cases. Channel Case by Case has been communicating with Reese and going over some of the info at 7 p.m. tonight. Should be quite interesting. Case by Case. Okay, I'll check that out. Thank you so much. Thank you for the super chat and thank you for the info. All right, so performing a Google search is not the definition of expert testimony. I don't know how Judge Gull allowed that as expert testimony, but that's neither here nor there. It's been and gone. Of course she did. The allegation that Sergeant Cecil's opinion then had anything to do with his knowledge or experience is based on facts outside the record supported by affidavit or verification in violation of Trial Rule 59H2. On page 10 of the state's response, in subparagraph 4, L. McClelland says, there is nothing in the logs, reports, or extractions that would indicate whether or not the phone had some kind of water damage, because that kind of damage is not registered in the logs, reports, or extractions of the phone. Whether or not there is water damage can only be determined by physically examining the phone. Well, didn't the state's expert physically examine the phone? It was in the state's possession for how long? Excuse me. Had they never come along and physically examined the phone? Why not? Why was there no physical examination of the phone? Because if a phone's water damaged, a little sensor comes on. So if the phone was water damaged, it doesn't even need a forensic examination of the phone. Any user can find that sensor. Do I need a fisherman's friend? The Pepsi Max is doing the job. Got a little bit of a cough. All right. Mr. McClelland is not an expert and attempts here to testify as if he were one. This pleading is not his first attempt. Every single allegation in this subparagraph quoted above is based on facts outside the record and unsupported by affidavit or verification in violation of Trial Rule 59H2. Let's have a look at page 10, subparagraph L. Here we go. There's nothing in the logs, reports, or extractions that would indicate whether or not the phone had some kind of water damage, because that kind of damage is not registered in the logs, reports, or extractions of the phone. Whether or not there's water damage can only be determined by physically examining the phone, which Stacey Eldridge did not do. No, Stacey Eldridge was the defense expert. She didn't physically examine the phone. But my point is, the state's expert supposedly did physically examine the phone. So instead of going Googling whether water damage or dirt can interfere with the headphone jack, instead of doing that, the state could have come along and said, Sergeant Cecil could have come back to the stand and said, but Stacey Eldridge is wrong, because a physical examination of the phone showed that the water damage sensor came on, and we have clocked that. We know there was water damage. Was there any mention of water damage in the state's testimony before Stacey Eldridge made that comment about the headphone jack? No. If that phone was water damaged, the state should have known about it. They never mentioned it. This is all post hoc analysis via a Google search, because Stacey Eldridge caught them out. Simple as that. Simple as that. All the allegations above, based on facts outside the record and unsupported by affidavits or verification, are crucial to the state's response. Because the absence of supporting affidavits or verification by Mr. McClelland violates Trial Rule 59H2, the state's response should be stricken in its entirety from the record of this case. Yes. In addition to alleging facts outside the record of this case without supporting affidavits or verification of the facts in his own motion, Mr. McClelland repeatedly misstates the law and therefore misleads the court. On page 2 of the state's response, Mr. McClelland says the statute governing safekeeping orders, Indiana Code 353311.1, does not require the court to have a hearing to make this determination. The court can make this determination based on the motion alone. He repeats the assertion on page 3, saying Judge Diener was within the jurisdiction of the statute to make a ruling on the safekeeping motion without a hearing. This cannot be so, because, as set out in Mr. Allen's verified motion to correct error on page 6, under the next section, Indiana Code 353311.2, Mr. Allen has an absolute right to refuse the transfer to the Department of Correction because then Sheriff Leesenby had only alleged the safekeeping request was to protect Mr. Allen's personal safety. How could Mr. Allen have exercised that statutory right if the court could make factual findings based on then Sheriff Leesenby's motion alone? He could not have, of course, and Mr. McClelland's interpretation, for the lack of a better word, of the statute is completely unsupportable. Here's the other issue, though. How would Rick Allen know? How would Rick Allen know that he could say, no, I don't want to go there. I want to stay in county jail. He wouldn't know that. He's not a lawyer. He's never even been in custody before. How would he know that he is allowed to say no? Because he didn't have an attorney to represent him, to tell him that he could say no to the move. So it's bullshit, whichever way you look at it. The state's response does not explain how there was any evidence before Judge Diener from which he could make a factual finding without a hearing to support the safekeeping order, because then Sheriff Leesenby's motion was unverified. And then, footnote 4, at pages 2 and 3 of the response, without denying that he knew Mr. Allen was represented by Brett Gibson, it's too many Brads in this case, but Brett Gibson, Mr. McClelland attempts to make much of Mr. Gibson not having filed an appearance for Mr. Allen. Yeah, he did. He did. He said, oh, Brett Gibson wasn't his attorney because he didn't file an appearance. So it doesn't matter that Nick McClelland knew that Rick Allen had an attorney because he'd communicated with Brett Gibson. And we know that Kathy Allen paid Brett Gibson $5,000. But there's more. Thank you, Finn's mom, for the $20. That's very kind of you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Mr. McClelland attempts to make much of Mr. Gibson not having filed an appearance for Mr. Allen. On page 3, for example, the state's response says, as of the filing of this motion for safekeeping, the defendant did not have an attorney of record. This complaint should strike the court as odd, because Mr. McClelland appeared at Mr. Allen's initial hearing on October 28, 2022, and filed the state's verified request to prohibit public access to a court record the same day, with no service of that motion on anyone. Of course, even though he knew Mr. Allen was represented by Mr. Gibson, and on November 22nd, 2022, Mr. McClelland both filed his request for what had become known as the gag order and appeared for the state of the hearing on his request to prohibit public access to the court record. But Mr. McClelland did not file his own appearance in this case until the next day. So he did all of that. He was acting as the state's attorney, doing this, filing motions, doing all this stuff, and had not even filed an appearance to say, here I am, I'm the prosecuting attorney. He didn't do that till November 23rd. So how can he criticise Brett Gibson for not filing an appearance and saying, oh, well, he wasn't Rick Allen's attorney because he hadn't filed an appearance? Well, Nick, you also didn't file an appearance until you've been doing stuff on the case. So what's good for the goose is good for the gander. Mr. McClelland did not file his own appearance in this case until the next day, November 23rd, 2022, almost a month after he initiated the case. It is apparently enough that everybody knew for a month that Mr. McClelland represented the state without his having an appearance on file. But it's insufficient for Mr. McClelland and then Sheriff Leesenby, at the very least, to have known Mr. Allen was represented by Mr. Gibson, regardless of Mr. Gibson's not having filed an appearance. As someone saying about glass houses should come to mind. Dear God. Dear God. All right, back to the main text. Why is there so many footnotes? I don't like footnotes. Like this stuff's really important. Get that in the main text. All right, on pages 5 to 6 of the state's response, Mr. McClelland says the presumption of prejudice from United States versus Chronic is only applied in cases of non-representation throughout the entire case. Smith versus Brown, 2014. Apparently, Mr. McClelland is unacquainted with footnote 25 of Chronic. Well, he's not familiar with Chronic. He didn't even spell Chronic's name right. He spelt it like chronic stress or chronic pain in the ass. He even spelt it wrong. So I'm very confident that he didn't read footnote 25. I'm very confident. Which unambiguously says the court has uniformly found constitutional error without any showing of prejudice when counsel was either totally absent or prevented from assisting the accused during a critical stage of the proceeding. Smith and Brown, the Seventh Circuit case Mr. McClelland relies upon, says nothing different. Quote, in Chronic, the court explained that presuming prejudice would be appropriate in the face of a complete denial of counsel or denied at a critical stage of the litigation. So, in the face of a complete denial of counsel, by going ahead and moving someone from a county jail to a Department of Correction via some imaginary safekeeping order, right, without informing that defendant's attorney, surely constitutes as the denial of counsel. What's the point of any of this when it goes straight to Judge Gould for dismissal? Because they have to go through Judge Gould for this stage to be able to get it to the appeals court. They have to go through this. They have to go through Judge Gould, and Judge Gould has to deny them or ignore them, and then they can go to the appeals court. They have to go through this. All right. It is really not debatable that Mr. McClelland has at best misunderstood Chronic. Our recent cases make it clear that contrary to the Court of Appeal's conclusion below, denial of counsel at any stage of a criminal prosecution is per se constitutional error. And that's Thomas versus Kemp, 1986. On page 6 of the state's response, Mr. McClelland calls the van video, Defendant Exhibits 3A, at best, impeachable evidence. Statement by Brad Weber would have been merely impeaching the van is substantive evidence of when Brad Weber arrived home in his van. And Agent Paul was not allowed to testify because he needed to testify via video link because he was working in Texas and he can't fly. He's got a medical condition. So to drive from Texas to Indiana and then back again at a crucial state of his work because he was doing something to do with the election, he couldn't do it. So he wanted to appear by video link, and Judge Gould said no. I mean, look, why can someone not just appear by video link like this day and age? It's crazy. All right. So see Pritchard v. State, 2004. Under the silent witness theory, video recordings and photographic evidence may be admitted as substantive evidence, blah, blah, blah. All right. More importantly, on page 6 of the state's response, Mr. McClelland erroneously asserts that a motion to correct error only applies to newly discovered evidence. Actually, Trial Rule 59H, by its own terms, provides for motions to correct error based upon evidence outside the record. The rule says nothing about newly discovered evidence. So just evidence outside the record. Defendants Exhibit 3A, the van video, is evidence outside the record. It didn't come up at trial. The state didn't bring it up. Defense didn't bring it up. It's outside the record. And Mr. McClelland has no answer to Mr. Allen's claim under Nephew versus Illinois, 1959, that from the van video in his possession, Mr. McClelland knew or should have known that Brad Webber's testimony, critical to the state's case, as presented to jury, is that he arrived home in his van about 2:30 on February 13th, before Libby's cell phone stopped moving at 2:32. But I want you all to go and watch my videos on the timeline, because the state's timeline does not make sense. I've done numerous videos now. Does not make sense. The state's timeline does not make sense based on the state's own analysis of Libby's phone data, namely the Apple Health data. That in itself, that one thing alone, means that the state's theory is incorrect, but the jury couldn't put it together. I wish the defense had hammered it home, but they didn't, and the jury didn't put it together. All right, well, let's go back to this footnote, because we're getting ahead of ourselves. Also, on page 6, Mr. McClelland says defendants 3A, the van video, is in the form of a YouTube link that is not identified as an item of evidence by an Indiana State Police number, and therefore is an improper submission for consideration by the court. In fact, as Mr. McClelland must know, Mr. Allen properly filed the video file, that is Defendants Exhibit 3A, with the court on a thumb drive. Mr. Allen also properly served the state with the exhibit in the same way. The web link was provided in Mr. Allen's motion to correct errors simply for ease of viewing by the parties and the court. So they do have it on a thumb drive with the evidence number. They just put the link in the chat, not in the chat, in the document for ease, because you can just clicky on it rather than going trying to find it. Okay, Mr. Allen is unaware of any requirement that his exhibits as identified by an Indiana State Police number, especially when the video recording was provided to the defense. Again, as Mr. McClelland must know, without such a number, so it didn't have a number on it anyway. Dear God. All right, we'll go back to this. Osbrook gave me a shout out for my timeline. Oh, cool. That's good. At the very least, they should get him a new trial. They should get him a new trial. They should vacate this, get him out on bond, can have an ankle tag on, get him out of Westville, and start again. But there's enough evidence now that this dude is innocent. There's enough evidence now to say this dude is innocent. It really, I mean, it's just ridiculous. It's ridiculous at this point. All right, we'll go back to this. So, Mr. McClelland knew or should have known that Brad Webber's testimony, critical to the state's case as presented to jury, that he arrived home in his van at 2:30 before Libby's phone stopped moving at 2:32. It was false. And 2, Mr. McClelland did nothing to correct Mr. Webber's testimony. All right, conviction, according to Nephew, conviction must fall when the state, although not soliciting false evidence, allows it to go uncorrected when it appears. See also Sivak versus Hardison, 2011. It's irrelevant whether the defense knew about the false testimony or failed to object or cross-examine the witness, because defendants cannot waive the freestanding ethical and constitutional obligation of the prosecutor as a representative of the government to protect the integrity of the court and the criminal justice system. That's what I've been saying. The state has the burden to prove that the person there at trial is guilty. The defence don't have to do anything. The defence could just turn up and say not a word if they wanted to. The state has to prove the case. It's not up to the defence to disprove it. They can do if they want, although they had all their wings clipped for this trial. But it's for the state to prove the case. And if the state intentionally, or at least allows evidence to go to the jury that is incorrect, then that's their burden. It's their burden to get the consequences, the full frontal force of the law against them. Because they've basically given the jury false information, whether they meant to or not. Not correcting it, not correcting false information, still gives the jury false information. This poor man has been convicted based on false information. All right. Everything above about Defendant's Exhibit 3A, the van video, applies equally to Defendant's Exhibit 3E, the FBI subject information sheet for Brad Weber, which shows Mr. Weber's cell phone first began pinging at his family's house at 2:50 on February 13th, 2017. On page 7 of the state's response, Mr. McClelland says the subject information sheet for Mr. Weber's phone is not newly discovered evidence and at best impeachable evidence. Defendant's Exhibit 3E is substantive evidence of when Mr. Weber returned home in his van, and because of it, was in the state's possession. Mr. McClelland either knew or should have known Mr. Weber's testimony that he returned home about 2:30 was false, and that with the van video, Mr. McClelland did nothing to correct Mr. Weber's false testimony. Wonder what the girl's family thinks. Well, Becky and Mike Patty think that Mr. McClelland is wonderful. The sun shines out of his ass. The entire state of Indiana thanks him, and it's just sickening what they think. They did an interview with Fox. I've not seen the full interview because watching the 4-minute clip that Fox put on YouTube made me feel sick. So I haven't gone and watched the full one. I think it's about 40 minutes. So I haven't seen it, but they think Rick Allen's guilty. They think that he shouldn't be appealing, and they think that Nick McClelland has done the state of Indiana and them and the girls a wonderful service. That's what they think. I don't know what Abby's family thinks, though. And that's just Becky and Mike Patty. I don't know what other members of Libby's family think either. They're just the outspoken ones. All right. Footnote 6. Mr. McClelland seems to be under the misimpression that all his evidence is substantive. He does, yeah, he does. While contradictory evidence presented by the defense is merely impeachable. This is of a piece with his idea that actual cell phone data showing headphones were plugged in and unplugged from Libby's phone after 2:32 indicates the data was caused by dirt or water damage, all because that data would otherwise disprove the entire case as presented, and everyone is to assume the case must have accurately portrayed what happened. Dear God. Finally, the one affidavit Mr. McClelland does have supporting the state's response is State's Exhibit 5, executed by Tobe Leesenby, which is an absolute joke. The problem with that is Leesenby's affidavit directly contradicts at least twice his sworn testimony at the safekeeping hearing held on June 15th, 2023. Oh, lo and behold, Tobe Leesenby's testimony is contradictory. I never would have thought that any of these state of Indiana mouthpieces would be saying incorrect or contradictory statements and blown over with a feather. Dear God. All right. All right. Leesenby says that Mr. Allen was transferred to the White County Jail on October 28th because of overcrowding at Carroll County Jail. However, at the safekeeping order in June 2023, Leesenby explained Mr. Allen's transfer to White County Jail as follows. Question. So this is from the safekeeping order. This is from the transcript of the safekeeping order that was on June 15th, 2023. And so, tell the court what arrangements you made to have in place at White County. Answer. Tobe says. Just a matter of simply having direct communication with Sheriff Bill Brooks and explaining my concerns for potential safety and security of our facility and ask him if he could temporarily hold Mr. Allen for us. Oh, no. Not another lie. Oh, no. Question. Okay. And were you confident that Mr. Brooks and his facility was adequate to hold him on a temporary basis? Tobe. At that time, yes. Oh. Boo-hoo, Tobe. You big liar. Oh, dear. Oh, dear. There is not a word about overcrowding at the Carroll County Jail being the reason why Mr. Allen's White County. Why do you think that these guys want the public to be kept in the dark? Why do you think? It's because they pull Swifties like this and they think that everybody should just close their eyes, turn away, and just ignore it all. Why do you think that these guys, these absolute lowlifes from the state of Indiana and all of their mouthpieces, why do you think they needed Brad Rosie and Andrew Baldwin gone? Because they were watching. They were watching and they were too dangerous. Why do you think that Nick McClelland got the conviction? Why? Because Judge Gull allowed him to have free reign, and she just clipped the defence's wings, kept them in a cage, and they weren't allowed to put on a proper defense. Tell me I'm wrong, someone. You tell me I'm wrong, someone. I'm not wrong, but you can tell me if you want. In his affidavit, Leesenby also states that Judge Diener at no time gave me legal advice on the motion pertaining to safekeeping. In the first instance, Leesenby is not competent to say whether Judge Diener gave him legal advice. In the second, Leesenby unambiguously said Judge Diener adjusted the language in Leesenby's safekeeping motion. So Judge Diener went along and gave him corrections, like like he was a teacher. Right. C+, you could do better. Oh, just let me change those words, Tobe. Listen, why do you think Judge Diener recused himself that very day? Why do you think he recused himself from the case that very day? He said it was public bloodlust. I say there was something very dark going on in Carroll County. Judge Diener wanted none of it, and that's why he recused himself. All right. So, again, this is from the transcript. Question. All right. And is that the motion that I've just alluded to that was filed by you, signed by you, and filed back in November 22? Yes, sir. Did you draft that motion yourself? Actually, I had presented a similar motion to request, I should say, to the court. And as I recall, the court had actually come up with or provided this particular document. So the court, i.e. Judge Diener, provided the document that was used to send Rick Allen to Westville. Unbelievable. Oh, I'm absolutely speechless. I'm speechless. Okay. So let me see if I can ask a more direct question. Did you prepare that motion in your office on a computer, essentially? I prepared a similar motion to this. Again, the wording was adjusted by the court. Judge Dina also asked Leesenby to sign the safekeeping motion, which he did. Leaving aside the improper ex parte communication between Judge Dina and Leesenby, adjusting the wording of a motion to be filed in his court, and on which, how many of Nick's motions do you think Judge Gull has quote-unquote adjusted? I don't know whether she has, but it seems to be somewhat of a pattern here. If Judge Dina was willing to do it, then what's Judge Gull been doing? Ex parte. All right, where was I? All right, just in the wording of a motion to be filed in his court, and on which he will be ruling. He's ruling on his own words. He's making a ruling on his own words. Obviously constituted both reviewing and drafting a document which Indiana Judicial Conduct Rule 310 prohibits, except when done for family members. I suppose a judge wouldn't be presiding over a family member's case. If a judge wanted to adjust something from a family member, I guess that will be all right. But anyway, Indiana rules say that it's all right. But a judge wouldn't be presiding over a family member's case, would they? But you can't write a document and then rule on it. You can't be the writer of the document and then you rule on it. That's just insane. We see now why Judge Dina recused himself. He knew he was in trouble. He knew this was a massive shitstorm. He knew it. I'd like to know what he thinks now. All right. Reviewing and adjusting the wording to a motion is most fundamentally the giving of legal advice, which Rule 310 also prohibits. Respondent admits the Commission's allegation in his letter advised the couple on the legality and effectiveness of the document he had reviewed. This constitutes the practice of law by giving legal advice. The judge can't give legal advice to anybody. The judge is the judge and should be sitting there with the scales of justice, right? The judge can't be siding for one side and writing the motions for one side. That's just insane. Mr. McClellan solicited then from Leesenby an affidavit saying Judge Dina had not given Leesenby legal advice when Mr. McClellan knew or should have known that was simply not true. It's all that's different from letting Brad Weber's false testimony go uncorrected. In summary, in violation of Trial Rule 59H2, the crucial facts on which the state's response depends are outside the record and are unsupported by affidavit or even verification of the response itself by Mr. McClellan. The state's response also pervasively misstates the law and therefore misleads the court. Finally, the one affidavit the state did submit in support of its response alleges facts Mr. McClellan knew or should have known are not true. For all these reasons, the court should order the state's response stricken from the record. Absolutely. And Nick McClellan to be put in jail for contempt of court or any number of things that he's done wrong here. He should be disbarred. At this point, Nick McClellan should be disbarred. He's not safe to have around. The state of Indiana should do something about this. He needs disbarring. All right. Conclusion. For the foregoing reasons, Mr. Allen respectfully requests the court strike the state's response from the record of this case and either vacate Mr. Allen's conviction or set his motion to correct error for a hearing. Mr. Allen also requests any other appropriate relief. Do you think he's going to get any relief? Do you think he's going to get his convictions vacated? Of course he isn't. Of course he isn't. But the correct thing to do here for Judge Gull is to have a hearing and actually sit there and be neutral. But honestly, honest to God, at this point, there is so much wrong with this trial, with this case, with Rick Allen's convictions, they need to let him go. And people say, that's not how the law works, Michelle. That's not how the law works, Michelle. Actually, it is how the law works. The judge can come along post-conviction when there is evidence that that conviction is not sound and vacate that conviction. At that point, Rick Allen is not a free man. At that point, the state has to do it all again and try it fairly. Rick Allen's not a free man if his conviction is vacated. But another thing that Judge Gould would be allowed to do in this case is grant Rick Allen bond. And he can sit at home with his ankle tag on whilst the state actually puts a case together that is fair. There you go. You're not American, Michelle. How can you comment on American law? Because the law's the same here, you absolute numpties who say things like that in my comments. There's a lot of stuff I don't know about the law in my country, just like there's a lot of stuff I don't know about American law. Why? Because I'm not a lawyer. However, the things I do know, I comment on. The things I don't know, I say I don't know. But I absolutely know that Judge Gould has the power to vacate Rick Allen's current convictions. In that case, not a free man, but what she could also do is give him bond. There you go. And the state would have to start again to try him fairly, with a new judge preferably. Exactly. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Not a truer word has ever been spoken. Absolutely. Absolutely. All right, guys. I said I was going to keep this brief so that it's watchable on the replay. I think an hour 12 is watchable on the replay. And also, my throat's a bit sore because I've been shouting. And I've been doing a lot of talking over the last couple of weeks, watching this trial. So I'm not ill. I just got a little bit of a tickly throat here. Very corrupt. Incredibly corrupt. Yeah, hit the thumbs up on your way out. If you're watching this and you're not commenting, because you can't comment unless you're a subscriber. The reason why I put it on subscribers only is to stop those porn links and stuff. You know, if you're just like any old person comment, you get loads of like these weird dating sites and porn links and stuff. So I'll put it on subscribers only. But if you're listening, if you're watching this and you like what you see, please do subscribe. I'm trying to get to 100,000 subscribers by the end of this year. And as we're only in the mid-February, I think it's doable. So if you watch my channel and you like it, you can subscribe just by clicking the subscribe button. It is free, absolutely free, to just click subscribe. All right. Like it on your way out. Thank you, everyone, for joining me. Go and watch this morning's video if you haven't seen it, where I talk about the other motion. Absolutely mind-blowing. It's blown the top off my head. Honest to God, when I read it, it blew the top of my head. So there you go. Please go over and take a look at it. Thank you, mods. Thank you to those that donated earlier on in the live stream. Don't think we had any new members. Let me just check. No, we didn't. But yeah, all right. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll see you soon. Bye, guys.